So when you are canceling your factors, you can only cancel factors that are identical. So monomial factors cancel with other monomials. Binomials can only cancel with another binomial. Right? And so when you're looking at these, it's part of why we did spend time talking about and naming the different parts, or what the names are for them. Is so when we refer to them here, you have the numerator is just one single monomial. The denominator is a binomial. Okay? So you can't do anything to the numerator. You keep it exactly as it is. But in the denominator, you can look to remove any common factors. Both these terms have a factor of z. Taking out a z from zq, again, whenever you remove common factors, the original form results. So the original form was a binomial. So if I take a z out of qz, I'm left with just the q. Take a z out of the z, I'm left with just the placeholder 1 plus 1. And so now I can look to cancel. My z is a monomial factor that cancels with one of these z's, turning it to a 2. The q plus 1 is a binomial, so it would only be able to cancel with another binomial factor. Don't take individual terms from it. Okay, you treat it as a whole unit. So my numerator is 5z squared q cubed. My denominator is q plus 1. Do make sure you put grouping symbols around the denominator for sure. The numerator you don't necessarily have to, but if you do put parentheses around the numerator, it will show up in the preview as all of that contained in the numerator. Okay, if you were to just leave it in this form right here, the preview would look like 5z squared q cubed over q plus 1. Okay, this means the same thing. Order of operations are still intact there. But if you put parentheses around this whole set, then this whole thing here will show up. Oops, they won't show the parentheses, but that whole thing will show up in the numerator. So it might look more consistent with what you're trying to get if you grouped it in that way. Okay, when you look at your simplified form, okay, in the process of simplifying, what you're looking to do is see, did I cancel any variable completely out of my denominator? Okay, and I canceled this factor here from my denominator completely, so I have to account for that as an additional domain restriction. What value of z would give you division by 0 here? 0. That's not apparent in my simplified form, so I have to exclude it. Now, what about q? I do see that q can't be a -1, but is that apparent in my simplified form? Yeah, so there's no additional domain restriction. So the DNE, again, does not mean that there's not any restricted value. What it means is there's no additional restricted value. Okay. In looking at this second example, I have binomial in my numerator and denominator, so I'm going to look to factor both. My numerator, I can remove a common factor of 2p, leaving a p minus 12. In the denominator, this is where, or again here, you have the binomial. There's no common factor. It's just the binomial itself. I can now cancel my common factor of p minus 12. That leaves me with my simplified form of 2p. And then what value of p would give you a division by 0 here? 12. Is that apparent in our simplified form? No. And so we need to include that as an additional domain restriction.